You are unmuted. If you'll just speak. There you go. Which case, Mr. Price?
I'm sorry, I had not planned to speak. Special use permits number 2.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Chris Leak, and I'm the chair of the City County Planning Board. I now call to order the October 14th, 2021 meeting, which will be conducted remotely. I want to recognize Councilmember Annette Scipio. Thank you for being with us today. And I don't know if there are any other council members on the line. I don't see anyone. Due to the state of emergency, all planning board members are participating remotely. I will now ask our acting planning director, Chris Murphy, to call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. George Bryan?
Here.
Melinda Dunnigan?
Here.
Walter Farabee?
Here.
Jason Grubbs?
Here.
Clarence Lamb?
Here.
Chris Leak?
Here.
Mo McCray?
Here.
Brenda Smith?
Here.
And Jack Spielman.
Here.
All right.
Thank you. When there is a vote, a roll call vote will be conducted. Each board member will be recognized and asked to clearly state their vote for the record. All guests participating in this remote meeting, either through Zoom or by phone, will remain muted until recognized by the board for comment. Today's meeting is being broadcast live on TV 13 and is also being live streamed on the city's website. The meeting will also be replayed on TV 13 tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. and Sunday at 4 p.m. Our first order of business today will be the consent agenda. These are items of which the petitioner is requesting withdrawal or continuance, or items for which staff has recommended approval and no one has signed up to speak in opposition. For our public hearings today, each side will have a total of 12 minutes. There is no rebuttal period. Once you have been recognized by the board, staff will unmute your microphone so that you can provide your comments. After the public hearing is closed and the board goes into work session, no one is permitted to speak unless the planning board asks them a question. The items under section B of our agenda will require further action by the elected body, either the city council or county commissioners. As such, votes taken today are recommendations which are considered by the city council or board of commissioners during its review of the request. For special use district zoning request, the petitioner must identify the intended use or uses of the site and give specific details on how the site will be developed. If you are addressing the board today, we will ask that before you begin your comments, please give us your name, address, and zip code for the record. Our first item of business is the approval of the minutes of the September 9th and September 23rd meetings. Are there any additions or corrections? Is there a motion?
Move approval, Clarence.
Motion by Mr. Lamb,
Second.
second by Mr. Stillman. Any further discussion?
Yes, could I ask one thing of the staff, Mr. Chair? We understood following the minutes and the meeting last time from the neighborhood of Town and Country that there were issues of communication. They had thought that that case was going to be brought up on the 13th today rather than at a work session, and had been talking with city staff about that evidently, or someone within city government. And I would wondering if we could get the staff to sort of research what was going on with that and how they were left out of that. They understood they could not talk, but they were trying to figure out something about that. And then at the last minute, when they got the link did not work to our meeting. And I just feel as a board meeting member during this period of COVID, when we're doing everything virtual, we just have to try the best we can to be public and transparent, particularly on controversial issues. So I was wondering if the staff could research for us on that and then get back to us at our work session.
We can.
Thank you.
All right, there's a motion for approval and a second on the board, on the floor for the minutes from September 9th and September 23rd. Mr. King, would you please call the roll?
George Bryan.
Yes.
I mean, Mr. Murphy, I'm sorry.
That's quite okay. I answered anything.
I'm so used to, no, it's Mr. Murphy.
I'm flexible. I'm good. Melinda Dunnigan.
Yes.
Walter Farabee.
Yes.
Jason Grubbs.
Yes.
Clarence Lamb.
Yes.
Chris Leak.
Yes.
Mo McCray.
Yes.
Brenda Smith.
Yes.
And Jack Stillman.
Yes.
All right, thank you. That's unanimous, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'm not going to recognize Desmond Corley for our consent agenda on today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I am going to start by asking which of my presentation screens you're able to see. Are you seeing a full screen slide, or are you seeing my
No
my
presentation yet.
We're not
Yes.
seeing any presentation at the moment.
Okay. Let's see. It would help if I shared my screen.
It's the
Okay,
full
now what are you seeing?
presentation mode. There we go. That's full.
Awesome. Mr. Chair, members of the board, the first item on the consent agenda is B1 W3496, which is a request to rezone some property to HBS from LBL and RS9. It's on the east side of University Parkway, south of Noel Drive. And if you'll recall, property just south of here at the intersection of University Parkway and Haynesville Road was recently rezoned to accommodate a car wash and some mixed commercial uses on the west side of University Parkway. Here's the proposed site plan for Express Tire, and in the bottom left corner, you'll see some elevations that were submitted. There is a condition of approval that will require them to submit actual building permit drawings that are consistent with those elevations that they've submitted or that they've provided here as a part of this rezoning petition. The site plan includes a significant area of undisturbed vegetation separating this property from the adjacent multifamily development. They also included a required cross connection to the north or in the northern portion of this property that's required by the UDO. The Northern Beltway and some other NCDOT projects in the vicinity, north and south along University Parkway, changed the conditions of this area. Staff found that when the area plan was adopted, neither one of those major projects was really considered or was really imminent. Allowing some intensification between the intersection of Haynesville and University Parkway and the Northern Beltway can help concentrate and contain those intense commercial uses on that corridor. Our recommendation as a staff is to keep that type of development on the eastern side of that corridor and leave the west as it is, or as the area plan recommends. Having said that, staff does recommend approval of this request, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Mr. Corley or staff? All right, Mr. Murphy, do we have anyone here to speak on this case?
Mr. Chairman, at the time of when we went to the slideshow, there was no one there. There was no opposition signed up for any case at that point. I'm not sure if anyone has joined the meeting since then. I'm not sure if Brian can hear, if he could just confirm that.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, then I'm going to close the public hearing. What is the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move that we recommend approval.
Motion by
Just a
Mr.
reminder,
Lamb.
board, you'll need two motions. One.
Oh,
for-
I'm so sorry. I apologize. Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move that the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
There's a motion by Mr. Lamb,
Second.
second by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion?
I
Please
would,
call.
if I may,
Yes.
yes, sir, thank you. I feel an obligation to disclose that over the years, I have had a brokerage relationship with one of the owners in the subject property. I do not have any relationship today, nor do I have any financially vested interest in this project whatsoever.
Thank you for that disclosure. There's a previous motion and second on the floor. Mr. Murphy, would you continue calling the roll?
Yes, sir. George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
sorry, Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
and Jack Stillman.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move that the planning board recommend approval of W 3496.
The motion by Mr. Lamb, seconded by
Second.
I think Mr. Bryan, second by Mr. Bryan. Any further discussion? Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
and Jack Stillman.
Yes.
All right, Mr. Chairman, that recommendation is unanimous.
All right, the next item on the consent agenda is B2, case W 3497. This is a general use request to rezone some property that's currently zoned RS9 and RM18S to RM5. It is between Ebert Street and Martin Street, just across from Kaywood Lane, and there's an extra word there, I'm sorry. This request is to rezone to a district that would allow slightly less density than the area plan recommends, but RM5 zoning would allow more residential density than is currently allowed, while keeping the existing uses. It also provides some opportunities to provide missing middle housing types and transitional land uses in relation to the surrounding properties. So staff recommends approval of this request. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions for staff? Mr. Murphy, is there anyone here to speak on this case?
Chairman, I'm gonna trust that when I asked Brian a second ago, he would let me know if there was any opposition here. I'm not aware of any opposition for this case.
All right. Close the public hearing. What is the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move the planning board find the request is consistent with the comprehensive
Motion
plan.
Thank you. Motion by Mr. Lamb,
Second.
second by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs.
Yes. Sorry.
That's okay. Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
and Jack Stillman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move the planning board recommend approval of W 3497.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Lamb, second by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? Mr. Murphy, would you call the roll?
George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
and Jack Stillman.
Yes.
All right, Mr. Chairman, that recommendation is unanimous.
Next item on the consent agenda is B3, case W 3498. This is a special use rezoning request for an accessory dwelling unit on the south side of Forest Drive, east of North Westview Drive. Here's the proposed site plan. It shows an existing accessory structure, not a dwelling, to the rear of that house that you see on the site plan that would be demolished and replaced with a single-story ADU with its own driveway access. The unit would not be very visible from Forest Drive and is consistent with legacy recommendations to accommodate a variety of housing types. So staff recommends approval of this request, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Yes, Mr. Corley.
Yes.
This is just for clarification purposes. Is it the case that the present UDO on accessory dwellings does not have a cap on size for a detached accessory dwelling?
Not specific to accessory dwellings. It's going to be relative to the size of the lot. So there is a cap on the size of accessory structures, and that would encapsulate accessory dwellings.
Yeah, the reason I was confused is because it's a little over the 1,000 square feet. And I think in the new version, there is a recommendation that they be capped at 1,000,
Yes,
but that's not the case now.
right.
Okay.
That condition does not exist.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, seeing no other questions for staff, what is the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Lamb, second by Mr. Grubbs. Any further discussion? Mr. Murphy, please call the roll.
George Bryant,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
and Jack Stillman.
Yes.
And Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move that the planning board recommend approval of W 3498.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Lamb, second by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? Murphy, if you would please call the roll.
George Bryant,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
and Jack Stillman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that recommendation is unanimous.
Great.
All right, the next item on consent is B4, it's case F1610. This is a request to change the zoning from GIS to GIS. If you'll look at the map that I have on here, the yellow line indicates the parcel boundaries. The red line indicates the current zoning boundaries. So this request would change that red line to incorporate the entire parcel rather than just a portion of it. This is almost 30 acres on the northeast side of Renolda Road across from Hoosier Drive. Here is the proposed site plan. So as many of you may be aware, there's an existing salvage yard in the eastern portion of this property. This proposal would leave that as it is and take the western portion of the property and develop it with single-story self-storage buildings. The majority of the site already has GIS zoning. The area plan also recommends industrial use of this site. Self-storage is a low impact use. It doesn't generate very much traffic. Although the area plan recommends more intense development on the site, sewer is not available. So staff believes that this use is appropriate, or this request is appropriate, and therefore we recommend approval. And I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Yes, Mr. Corley.
Yes.
In the staff report, you flagged some additional uses that are proposed to be added to the GIS use that could have the potential to be impactful to the surrounding area. I think there were 5 of them: asphalt, concrete plant, fuel dealer, recycling plant, signs off premises and terminal freight. Given that this area is surrounded by residential, did you have any discussions with the petition about removing those uses?
We did, and I might need to call on Gary because he's the one who had the conversations with the applicant. My understanding is that they weren't necessarily interested in removing those uses. I can speak to a couple of them specifically, like sign off premises would not be allowed. The UDO has other limitations that would basically make that null, so it wouldn't even be possible. And then the asphalt plant would require an elected body special use permit. So it's not something that could just be allowed. There would be another process. The other uses, I don't think require any higher standard for review. But of course, if they were proposed, they'd have to go through the site plan amendment process at least before they could even be approved for development.
And Ms. Dunnigan, that's correct. We did speak with the petitioner about those extra uses, and they wanted to keep those in for maximum site flexibility.
Okay, and I had another question as well. And that relates really to the Doral Drive, Renolda Road interchange plan that was done recently for this, that includes this site. And the recommendation of that plan was basically not to propose a specific design for this site. And that's reflected in your staff report. But I do think that maybe not the entire context of that recommendation was represented in your staff report, because at least, from my own, as I was a participant in that plan, from my own understanding of that recommendation, it seemed like the recommendation was not to redevelop this site or propose new uses until there could be a comprehensive design for this site once sewer was extended. And it does say specifically in the plan that the plan recommends waiting on providing a design vision for this site. To consider redevelopment of the site is premature at this time without a more comprehensive plan for the entire area in place that includes the extension of utilities to the area. And I was a participant of that plan, and the neighbors recommended lots of uses for the site, and the plan decided that it was just premature to do a comprehensive design. And here's my question, sorry, this is the background. My question really is, how can the staff support adding new uses to this site and development of it without going through that process of coming up with a vision, especially since this site is very key to how the Beltway area surrounding it develops, the land between this site and the Beltway in particular. I'm trying to understand the thinking process.
Melinda, this is Kirk. I'll be glad to jump in on that one. So you're absolutely correct in that the plan and the neighborhoods and stakeholders who participated in that process were looking for other things such as institutional use or campus use or office or economic or medical or some of those other things that are talked about in the plan. And you're also right that the staff was recommending that this site not be redeveloped until it could be comprehensively assembled as part of that process once sewer and utilities were here. The way staff got on board with this request is they're really just making use of existing structures and also adding some less intense, from an investment perspective at least, kind of metal buildings out there. They're taking advantage of the existing structure to be renovated for the office. They're not really doing anything with the existing motor vehicle use out there. They are putting some metal buildings out there, but again, from a investment perspective, if this was to be able to be sewered in the future and assembled as part of a larger development, it may not be the most economically productive use for the property owner at that time. So it was trying to find a way to allow the property owner to make more productive use of their property while providing a service in the area, but not doing something that would completely ruin the chances for redevelopment. And again, in the staff's opinion, this seems like it fit that bill.
Okay, well, thanks for clarifying that.
All right, any other questions for staff? Not per my earlier understanding, there is no opposition to this case, so is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, so I'm
Mr.
going to
Chairman?
close the public.
I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. Got to
I
close the public
apologize.
hearing.
Yeah.
That's all right. What is the pleasure of the
Mr.
board?
This is Clarence. I move that the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Lamb, second by Mr. Grubbs. Any further discussion? Mr. Murphy,
Yeah,
would you please call?
yeah,
Yes, Ms. Dunnigan.
I just wanted to say that I appreciate the staff's reply to my question. I just have a disagreement as to whether or not this fits with the recommendation of the Doral Drive plan. I don't believe.
Noted.
Yeah.
Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. George Bryan,
No.
Melinda Dunnigan,
No.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
And Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence again. I move that the planning board recommend approval of F-1610.
Second.
Been motion by Mr. Lamb, second by Mr. Grubbs. Any further discussion? Murphy, would you call the roll?
George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
No.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that recommendation is 8-1 in approval, for approval.
Thank you.
Next item on consent is B5, it's case F-1611. This is a request to rezone from GI and RM8 to GI general use. This property is on the west side of Dillon Farm Road, which is southeast of New Walkertown Road. Again, it's a general use request. The majority of the parcel already has GI zoning. The area plan recommends industrial uses on this property, acknowledging that there's a scarcity of industrial opportunities in the county. Staff does not see any issues with this request. We recommend approval, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
All right, I don't see anyone with questions for staff. And I still believe there's no one here in opposition to this case. So if that is correct, I'm going to close the public hearing. What is the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move that the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Lamb, second by Mr. Grubb. Any further discussion? Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
George Bryan,
No.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
and Jack Steelman.
Yes.
And Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence again. I move that the planning board recommend approval of F-1611.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Lamb, second by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? Murphy, would you please call the roll?
George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
and Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that recommendation is unanimous. And Mr. Chairman, just know we're transitioning into items that do not require a consistency vote. So the next items will just be single motions.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's right. Items C1 and C2 don't require dual motions. They are also not items that require a public hearing. These are special use permit requests that require the planning board to provide a review for the elected body, certifying that the site plan that is proposed does or does not meet UDO requirements. So with that in mind, the next item is C1. It's case W3495. It is a proposal for a transmission tower in an RS9 zoning district. It's southeast quadrant of Interstate 40 and High Point Road. I've got two plans on this page just so you can get an idea of what the applicants are doing to mitigate visual impacts. In your packet and on the website, you would have seen photometric diagrams that show the tower visibility from various points along High Point Road and Interstate 40. The proposed site plan includes a thoroughfare overlay buffer along the frontage with I-40, even though the lease area technically doesn't touch the right-of-way or doesn't follow the right-of-way. They've also included an engineer's letter demonstrating the safety of the tower's design in the event of a disaster. Together, those things are what the applicant is submitting as a request for alternative compliance, because the tower is not set back 150 feet from the right-of-way of Interstate 40, and I don't believe it's 150 feet from High Point Road either. The UDO allows applicants to make such a request, and those are things that they're submitting along with their request for alternative compliance. The letter should have been included in your materials and also posted on the website. The proposed site plan otherwise meets the requirements of the UDO, so staff would recommend that this plan move forward to the City Council.
And Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move approval.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Lamb, second by Mr. Grubbs. Discussion?
Yes.
Murphy, would you? Yes, Mr. Bryan.
Mr. Corley, did the petitioner present any reasoning that they couldn't move the tower 50 feet?
There was no reasoning specific to that, and I believe that the applicant is on the call. If not, Gary's here and he's had discussions with them. But their engineer's letter does talk extensively about the tower's design and how it's designed to fall in the event that it were compromised, that it were structurally compromised. That would be safely within an area that would not impact the rights of way for a High Point Road and the interstate.
Well, I mean, and I'm very appreciative of the applicants developing a very unobtrusive tower. They've done a great job in that. But the issue of safety when we came up with these rules was around the fall zone. And what I'm seeing here is something that it would have seemed to have been more appropriate to bring up at that time, that if these things weren't going to fall that far, then why did we have this length of radius matching the tower height when we wrote these safety concerns? So I'm really concerned that what we're doing here is undermining our safety concerns that were well thought out and well debated by both the cell phone companies and others, and that could have been presented at that time, but to my knowledge was not, and I followed that very closely. So I don't see any reason to accommodate this unless there's some overwhelming reason that it can't be moved 50 feet. And I don't know who to ask that.
Mr.
I mean,
Corey, you did say there's someone who could speak on this, correct?
They should be. I'm looking for them.
Should be a Victoria.
Victoria Farmer is here. Victoria, can you hear us? It doesn't say that you're muted.
We can barely hear you. Victoria, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Okay, so we can't hear.
I was going to say, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Bryan, you know, to answer the question, I mean, certainly it's within the board's prerogative to make a motion and or vote however you believe. The ultimate arbiter of the request for the alternative compliance is the approval authority, which would be the elected body. So, I mean, again, if the planning board feels strongly enough that they feel like that the 150-foot setback should be met, then I think the planning board could make their recommendation contingent upon that. You could recommend that the plan doesn't meet UDO requirements, again, because that's an element that I think you could call out specifically for the elected body to consider. But I don't think it's something that we necessarily should send back to the petitioner. It should either go forward with a recommendation contingent upon it meeting the 150, go forward with a recommendation for denial because it doesn't meet the 150, or go forward with a recommendation for approval because the majority of the board feels like it's a reasonable request.
Well, I
So
mean,
noted. So here,
yeah, I mean,
Bryan.
what we're talking about is, you know, is the next request going to be similar and say that now there's a break zone and towers can now be a lot closer to populated areas and houses and things like that. So we're entering a slippery slope here with no ostensible reasoning, and it is not supported by the UDO on this.
Well, except that it does grant alternative compliance if the approval authority is so compelled. I mean, again, it was perhaps one of the reasons why they did not protest whenever the ordinance was drafted, is because that language was specifically put in there to be able to request alternative compliance. And again, I can't go back and recreate the thought process at the time, but you know, again, in the spirit of keeping the item moving forward with a lot of numerous moving parts, perhaps the alternative compliance was the reason why they didn't object. Again, I can't speculate one way or the other, but that could be, you could construe it that way.
Chris, how difficult is it to make a specific note of what the alternative compliance is for, although it's pretty clear in the documents? I'm not an engineer to say their calculations of how it's going to follow design would not work, or that it would. So I think at some point, I mean, I would feel comfortable moving forward with it in that they've taken that into account and we have the alternative compliance process.
Okay, so I think we've had discussion. We've heard from Mr. Bryan, Ms. Smith, Mr. Murphy, Ms. Dunnigan. I see your hand being raised. Yeah.
I did have one other comment, and this is difficult. My problem here is that my understanding is that we're voting on whether or not, I mean, the only role we have is to vote on whether or not this request complies with the UDO. And I think, you know, it definitely doesn't, because the alternative compliance is not something that we grant, it's something that the elected body grants. So until that process takes place, my conclusion is this does not meet the UDO requirements.
Victoria Farmer's here. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, we can. Just let me, the one thing I would respond back on that is similar to the next case we're getting ready to hear, which is a special use permit for a parking waiver. We're, certifying that the site plan meets UDO requirements there, but obviously it doesn't for the item that's being considered for the special use permit. My view would be that that's the same purpose and behind the alternative compliance provision. We're saying it meets the UDO requirements except for what they're asking for alternative compliance. And as part of their approval process, when it gets to the elected body, that is part of the record as far as what they are approving. So essentially it's the planning board's role, if you're so compelled, to say that the plan meets UDO requirements except for what they're asking for alternative compliance for, because it's outside of your purview. Unless, unless you say, well, I don't, alternative compliance is fine, but we don't think it meets it, so we're going to recommend denial, or we're going to recommend approval only if it's 150 feet away.
Well, Chris, if we did that, we would never pass anything on for alternative compliance.
Correct.
Right.
So I think the way to move forward, we're going to give Ms. Farmer an opportunity to address question that Mr. Bryan inquired. So Ms. Farmer, if you could state your name and your address and your zip code for the record, and if you would like to address that.
Yes, Victoria Farmer. I live in Ooltewah, Tennessee, and my zip code is 37363. And the question, I believe, came up about not meeting the one side setback of 150 feet. And I just wanted to point out that the only place where they're not meeting that setback requirement is up against the I-40 interchange. The fall zone does allow that the collapsed engineered fail point is at 100 feet, and we're more than 100 feet away from the I-40 interchange there. If the requirement for the alternative compliance is necessary, I mean, if it's not allowed, I can ask if we can move the center of the tower toward the rear of the compound, staying within the leased area as shown on the site plan. It would just be that the tower, instead of being in the center of the square, be over closer toward the rear. I think the question became, where would it be more suitable visibly? And I think that the moving it more toward, the south end was not as objective approved, for the people who live around in the community. There'd be less obtrusive to the interstate, if that makes any sense. And so I'm just second guessing here, but I believe that's why that they went with that 100 foot off of the interstate versus any of the other compass points. Does that answer the question?
Ms. Farmer, I think it's Ms. Farmer. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. But the tower is designed to break at its break point. I think that's the language.
Correct.
Let's see. And
yes,
so as to not be able to fall 150 foot radius. I mean, it's designed.
Correct. It will fall with. Yeah. It will collapse within the lease entitlement area. That's the whole point of that.
Yeah. Right. That's the whole point, and that's how you have met the alternative compliance requirement. At least that's the way I understand it. So I'm very comfortable with the motion that I've made. But anyway, thank you.
Okay. I just wanted to give explanations. Somebody was asking why was it. So that was the only way I know. Yeah.
Mr. Bryan that asked the question. I would be more comfortable if you moved it further away. I think the engineer was addressing wind shear or something like that in that, but these towers have also been affected by fire, which can compromise the integrity of the base of the tower. And I didn't see anything addressed in the engineer's discussion about that. And it seems to be a fairly simple matter to comply with that. And I'm very complimentary in terms of the design of this and how it would fit anywhere along your area there.
Okay.
All right, thank you. So I think we've had the conversation, discussion. Is there a motion at this point?
Mr. Chairman, there's already been a motion for approval and a second.
It's been said. Okay, so previous motion and a second on the floor. Would you please call the roll?
Mr. Bryan,
No.
Ms. Dunnigan,
No.
Mr. Farabee,
Yes.
Mr. Grubbs,
Yes.
Mr. Lamb, Mr. Lamb.
Coming back, he's coming back in now. He dropped.
Okay. I'll skip it. Mr. Leak.
I think Mr. Lamb is back, but yes.
Okay. Mr. Lamb. Ms. McCray.
Clarence, you're on mute.
Brenda Smith.
Yes.
Jack Stillman.
Yes.
Clarence Lamb.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, that recommendation on the site plan is 7-2.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
I should be unmuted now. The next item is C2, which is case W3500. This is a request for a special use permit for a parking exception for a restaurant in Growth Management Area 2. We've seen a couple of these in the past few months, especially, and I think they've all been in the West End area too. But this one is at the northeast corner of Summit Street and 4th and 1/2 Street. Here's the proposed site plan. It proposes a mixed-use building with commercial uses, namely a restaurant. That's why they have to request a special use permit on the ground floor, and then a residence on the upper level. It's similar to the other cases that I mentioned before. The site plan meets the UDO requirements with the exception of the parking, which is why they have to request a special use permit in the first place. So staff recommends approval of this, or we acknowledge that it meets the UDO requirements.
And Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move approval.
Second.
Ask Mr. Corley some questions. You say it meets the requirements. I'm trying to figure out the questions the staff asked about it. I'm confused in what requirements we're talking about, because the staff also was asking, is the top floor going to be a residence, or is it going to be a business, or what in this plan? Did you ever figure that out, Mr. Corley?
The site plan says that it's going to be a residence, and the applicant will.
Okay, but it said under the permit, it indicated that both floors would consist of business occupancy space. Was your note?
In the permit?
It's note 17. I'm just reading. I just wanted to know if that had been resolved.
This is not related to the special use permit request. There's a shell building permit under review right now that doesn't really have anything to do with this. A shell doesn't have any particular use.
Oh,
But
so
the
that
applicant,
doesn't affect it.
right.
And on the note 18, a swimming pool, that wouldn't affect the UDO of this either in terms of the site?
No.
Okay.
Chairman, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
All right, sorry. There's a previous motion and second on the floor. Would you please call the roll, Mr. Murphy?
Mr. Bryan,
Yes.
Ms. Dunnigan,
Yes.
Mr. Farabee,
Yes.
Mr. Grubbs,
Yes.
Mr. Lamb,
Yes.
Mr. Leak,
Yes.
Ms. McCray,
Yes.
Ms. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Stillman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that recommendation is unanimous.
Thank you.
The next item or the next section of the agenda, we're moving into subdivision reviews. So this one will also require one motion, and it would be for approval or denial of the preliminary subdivision that's proposed. So D1 is subdivision 2021-110. It's a subdivision called Stapleton. 112 lots are proposed on a little more than 56 acres. This property is on the west side. It's the east side of Cooper Road. Apologize for that. North of Phelps Farm Road. You can see the area in yellow, and when I go to the next slide, it's going to show the proposed site plan. Some of those areas that are touching Cooper Road on the west side are not going to be included in this preliminary subdivision. They're going to be separated out using the minor subdivision process before this is platted. So here's the proposed Stapleton subdivision. It is not a planned residential development or PRD, so they're not required to provide active open space or any kind of open space that a PRD would normally provide. These lots are going to be required to meet the dimensional requirements of the underlying zoning district, which they do. Staff recommends approval of this request.
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move approval.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Lamb, second by Mr. Grubbs. Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Stillman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that item was approved unanimously.
And then the last item on consent is section E. This is going to be planning board review items. Again, we need one motion, and that will be for approval or denial. This one is PBR 2021-17. It is a PRD by the name of Fiddler's Green. There are 66 lots proposed, or 66 units proposed on 21.75 acres south of Fanning Road between Fanning Oaks Drive and Fanning Court. Here's their proposed site plan. Because this is a PRD, they are required to provide open space areas. They have them in hatched areas at the corners of this larger central area. And there's another active open space here. The green areas, I believe, are their tree save or required preservation areas. These are 66 units, as I mentioned before, proposed on a single lot, which the UDO does allow for PRDs. So the site plan meets UDO requirements, and staff recommends approval of this request.
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move approval.
Motion by Mr. Lamb,
Second.
second by Mr. Grubbs. Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Stillman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that item was approved unanimously.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Corley. We're now going to move into the staff report. Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to call on Kirk Erickson first to give you a preview of your work session coming up 2 weeks from today on the 28th.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Chris. Just to give you a brief update on the work session, we've got 3 items scheduled at this point. The first would be a second work session item on the ADU text amendment. You all heard that at your work session in September. So Amy Crum will be giving some more information on that and showing the actual ordinance language. That has been scheduled for a November public hearing. The second item will be an informational presentation on the Public Art Master Plan adopted earlier this year by the Public Art Commission and the elected bodies. So Kelly Bennett, who staffs that commission, will be presenting that. And lastly, we're going to be presenting a site plan certification request to the board for case W3499. This is a site on Liberty Street that's requesting an elected body special use permit. Basically, this project is a kennel and bar, restaurant without drive-through facility, and they need some setback waiver on that request. And they've got a deadline on the property that they're working with that will expire in early November. So we're trying to work with this project to get it to the November 1st city council meeting, and that's why it's going to the work session. So that's all I have at the moment. And again, we'll send out information on those items next Friday.
Thanks, Kurt. The second item is I'll turn to Desmond for a preview of your November caseload. And the good thing is we didn't continue anything today to then. So
that is great. And the special use permit request that Kirk mentioned was originally scheduled to go to November, but now you'll hear it at your work session. So that's one less item at the public hearing meeting. There is a case on schedule to be heard in November that was continued from, I think, the September meeting. It's for Love's Truck Stop out near Tobaccoville and Rural Hall. So I'm sure you all have heard about it. That one should be coming in November. We also have three other requests for rezoning. And then our last public hearing item is going to be the text amendment regarding accessory dwelling units. We will also have a PBR for a Duke Energy substation. So it's a lighter load, but I expect that the public hearings for Love's Truck Stop and ADUs will be robust. That's all I have.
Desmond, also something Desmond has been working on that we're in the process of getting ready to post and send out will be the calendar of significant dates for the year 2022. It's already time for us to get that out, as we've already, as Desmond just just alluded to, we've already accepted cases for November. So the next submittal deadline will be for December, and then we'll be in 2022 submittal cycle. So Desmond has worked hard putting that calendar together. And like I said, we'll be sending that out to the development community, to the planning board, and have it posted on our website sometime over the next week. Just as a reminder, we do have work session coming up on the 28th, but that will be your last work session of 2021 in tradition with the planning board, because the work session typically falls within the Thanksgiving timeframe and within the Christmas timeframe. We will not have work session in November and December, so we're coming towards the end of the year. Getting back to Mr. Bryan's request from earlier in the meeting, we will prepare a report to bring back to you at work session on River Rock. I can give you a little bit of history, and it's one of those things where we're going to change our process whenever items don't make it onto the planning board, but we know they're not going to make it on. We have not been putting them on the agenda, and therefore it's not publicly known when an item is being continued to. That item was actually, as part of the agreement for them to continue it, it was continued to the work session, but that was never disclosed at the September public meeting because it wasn't on the agenda. And they had agreed to continue it to that work session so that we could have the discussion related to perhaps them providing funds towards that study. So that was, it's our fault in that the way we did it, it wasn't clear on when that item was going to be continued to. But again, we'll bring you back a report that kind of has the timeline of how everything was laid out. But that's kind of the 30,000 foot view of that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, that's all I have as far as staff.
All right. Again, thank everyone. Again, Ms. Councilmember Scipio, thank you for joining us again today. Is there anything else for the good of the order?
Just have a motion to adjourn while there's daylight to get out and have a walk at the end of the day.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Stillman. Everyone have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.